We turn now, a few minutes before the top of the hour, to this moment that played out on TV last night. It's been nearly 7 years since Donald Trump excused Vladimir Putin's murderous ways by saying our country does plenty of killing also.
You remember that?
Oh,
I mean, it was December of 2015, and we kept pushing him to criticize Vladimir Putin. He refused to do it. I remember a year later, Jay Norlinger at National Review said it may have been one of the key moments in the presidential campaign.
For sure.
Because it showed that there was something extraordinarily untoward about Donald Trump's relationship with Vladimir Putin. He still, even after the war crime, still refuses to criticize him.
Yeah, even as the former president says he laments the situation in Ukraine, he is unwilling to directly call out Vladimir Putin's evil ways, despite Sean Hannity's best attempts last night and the graphic images rolling across the screen. Trump refuses to answer a most basic question.
We have mass graves. We have innocent civilians being slaughtered in the streets. We have entire neighborhoods leveled. We have war crimes and atrocities that have been well chronicled from Bucha to Mariupol. Mariupol's 95% wiped out. It's all rubble today. I asked you the last time you were on whether you think that this is evil in our time. Do you believe this is evil in our time?
I think in 100 years, people are going to look back and they're going to say, how did we stand back and NATO stand back, which in many ways I've called a paper tiger. Don't forget, I rebuilt NATO because when I became president, the first thing I noticed when I went there to the first meeting was that most of the countries were not paying or were paying far less than they were supposed to. There were only 8 out of 28 countries that were paid in full. The United States was not only one of them. We were making up the deficit in order to protect Europe. We were paying possibly 80% of NATO to protect them. And then they take advantage of us yet on trade, because on trade, they're every bit as bad as China. They treated us very badly on trade. We changed a lot of that around, but they were very tough on trade. I asked Angela Merkel, how many Chevrolets are you selling this month in Munich or Berlin? And she looked at me, well, probably none. I said, you're exactly right, none. And yet we had the Mercedes-Benz and the Volkswagens and all of them. We had all of the German companies. And the same thing with farmers. Our farmers sell virtually nothing to Europe. You take a look at what we sell, and yet we take their product. They treated us very badly in trade, and we defended them. And we really, if you look at the real numbers, I'll bet you it's close to 80%. I said, you have to pay. And if you don't pay, we're not going to defend you. And as soon as I said that, everybody, we took in hundreds of billions of dollars, and NATO became rich. It was going down at a level that nobody, it was not even, it would not have been sustainable. You wouldn't be in a position now of giving them a rifle, let alone billions of dollars worth of equipment. So we did, I had a big impact. And then and by the way, that was an impact against Russia. The pipeline was against Russia. The sanctions were against Russia. And then I listened to the fake news say, oh, President Trump loved Russia, and he didn't do much about Russia. Well, I stopped the pipeline, the biggest thing they've ever done. I created a powerful NATO because I got people to pay what they had to pay. They weren't paying. And nobody did sanctions like I did. So with all of that being said, when I look at what's happening, it never would have happened under the Trump administration, regardless of strength one way or the other. I knew Putin very well, almost as well as I know you, Sean. And I will tell you, we talked about it. We talked about it a lot. He did want Ukraine, but I said, you're not going into Ukraine. He would never, ever have gone into Ukraine. And President...
All right. It's just, the guy, it's grotesque.
It really is.
It's just grotesque. Sean Hannity asks him about mass graves. Sean Hannity asks him about war crimes. Sean Hannity asks him about mass atrocities, asks him about the war crimes in Bucha, about Mariupol being leveled to the ground. And he's talking about Chevrolets in Munich. He's talking about Mercedes-Benz and VW. Sean asks, Is this evil? Will you say this is evil? I've asked you before if you think this is evil. Sean Hannity certainly thinks it's evil. I think most Republicans in the Senate think it's evil. And he's talking about Chevrolets and VWs.
He's talking about himself.
And he lies, of course, lies about NATO, saying that he rebuilt it. What a liar. What an absolute liar. He tried to destroy NATO for 4 years. There were fears across America and the West that if he was reelected, he would withdraw the United States from NATO. He didn't get anybody now. And if I hear stupid people today repeating these lies that he got people to pay their fair share. No, Vladimir Putin did, and Joe Biden did, by the attack on Ukraine, a country, again, that he wouldn't even send military support to because he was too busy shaking them down. Military support that Republicans and Democrats in the Senate had supported. But again, Willie, what is so striking to me is, I'd say shocking, but it's obvious he refuses to criticize Vladimir Putin, a war criminal. He was saying that. He was talking about Chevrolets. He was talking about farmers in America. He was talking about trade, while Sean showing images of Mariupol leveled, showing pictures of people dead in the streets, showing pictures of war crimes. And Trump could not bring himself to criticize Vladimir Putin. As it was in December of 2015 on our show, as it was last night on Sean Hannity's show, it is just absolutely repugnant. And I will say it again. 7 years later. It is disqualifying.
Sean Hannity walked him right up to the edge and said, "This is an easy one for President Trump. Is this evil?" And by the way, that was a mulligan. He said, "I asked you about Putin's evil ways last time. You didn't give me an answer I liked. Here's another shot at it." And the contrast of what Donald Trump was talking about as those images were being presented on the screen of bodies lying in the streets of Bucha. It's the easiest question in the world right now. Is Vladimir Putin evil? Look at Bucha. Look at Mariupol. Look at everything we've seen over a month and a half. And then there's, as you point to, the utter lie about how he looked at NATO. In 2018, just Google it. This is all open from administration officials, from media reports. He wanted to pull the United States out of NATO, and General Mattis and John Bolton and others had to stop and explain to him the importance of NATO. He didn't get it. Why are we even in this? It's a drain on us. Forget NATO. So that's a lie. But really at the core of this is just the exposing of a man who is who he is and won't even cross Vladimir Putin in this moment while civilians are being slaughtered in Ukraine.
Yeah, it's sickening. And Jonathan Lemire, you, of course, covered Donald Trump. You were the one in Helsinki that asked the question about whether Donald Trump trusted Vladimir Putin more than he trusted the men and women in the American intel community who risk their lives every single day. And what did he say? He said he trusted Vladimir Putin more. Again, the same year as Willie said that he was trying to withdraw the United States from NATO because he understood. And what a clarifying 6 weeks this has been for people brainwashed by Donald Trump. Donald Trump understood in 2018 that NATO was the mortal enemy of Vladimir Putin. And it would be NATO, with the backing, the strong backing of the United States, that would stop Vladimir Putin from being able to go into other NATO states, that would stop Vladimir Putin from being able to run across Eastern and Central Europe, which was his dream. He wanted to reconstitute the old Russian Empire, and Donald Trump knew the only way he could help him was by getting rid of NATO. And here we are. Again, Sean Hannity asking him, as Willie said, a second time while showing pictures of civilians with their hands bound behind them, shot and lying dead in the street, and Mariupol leveled. And Republicans and Democrats in Washington calling Donald Trump what he is, a war or calling Vladimir Putin what he is, a war criminal. And Donald Trump Trump won't even follow Sean Hannity's, layup of a question. Is this evil? Wouldn't answer it last night, just like he wouldn't answer us 7 years ago, and so many others since then on whether he was going to condemn Vladimir Putin for killing politicians and journalists in Russia. And of course, your question in Helsinki, there is a through line there. This man will not criticize Putin. Hey, thanks so much for watching our YouTube channel. You can follow up on today's top stories and breaking news, or catch up on your favorite MSNBC shows all in one place. Download the NBC News app today.